The accidental contact was brief, Alex's hand brushing against Lyra's shoulder as they both reached for equipment in the laboratory module. But Dr. Lyra Moonwhisper's reaction was immediate and fierce. She pulled away sharply, her long, elegant ears swept back in a posture Alex had learned indicated anger or distress, and her voice carried an edge he'd never heard from her before. "Get your hands off me, human. Do not touch me without permission." The rebuke was public enough that other crew members nearby froze awkwardly. Alex stammered an apology, trying to explain it was accidental while backing away to give her space. Lyra didn't acknowledge his words, just gathered her materials and left the lab with rigid posture suggesting barely controlled emotion. Alex was left confused and embarrassed. He knew Kytherian culture had complex protocols around physical contact, but the intensity of her reaction seemed disproportionate to an accidental brush of contact. Over the following days, the tension between them became obvious to the entire crew aboard the exploration vessel Horizon's Promise. Lyra maintained careful distance from Alex specifically, rearranging her schedule to avoid shifts where they'd normally cross paths, requesting different personnel for technical support rather than the engineering team he led. When their roles required interaction, she was professionally cold, speaking only when necessary and maintaining physical distance that made her discomfort clear. Alex tried to apologize properly during a crew briefing, but Lyra cut him off with curt acknowledgement suggesting she wanted the incident forgotten rather than discussed. Other crew members offered conflicting explanations. Some said Kytherians simply didn't like being touched due to enhanced sensory capabilities. Others suggested Lyra specifically had trauma or cultural reasons for being particularly sensitive. A few hinted that maybe she just didn't trust humans. Alex felt terrible but didn't know how to fix a situation where the person he offended refused to engage long enough to accept proper apology. The mission continued with professional efficiency despite interpersonal tension. Then crisis hit. The Horizon's Promise encountered an unexpected spatial anomaly while surveying a planetary system. The ship was caught in gravitational shear forces that overwhelmed navigation systems, causing cascading failures across critical systems. The crew managed to break free and establish stable orbit around a nearby moon, but the ship was damaged, several crew members injured, and everyone shaken by how close they'd come to complete disaster. During the emergency, Alex worked alongside Lyra in one of the damaged laboratory sections, both securing volatile samples and preventing contamination breaches while the ship was being torn apart around them. They operated with efficient coordination born of shared training, Alex following Lyra's directions about dangerous samples while she trusted his assessment of structural stability. They didn't have time for personal tension, just urgent cooperation to prevent the crisis from becoming catastrophic. After the immediate emergency was stabilized, Alex was in his quarters trying to process what happened when his communication panel chimed with an incoming message, private channel, Lyra's designation. The message was brief, text only. "Please come to my quarters when you are able. I need to speak with you." Alex's first thought was that she was going to formally complain about his conduct during the emergency. But something about the phrasing, "I need to speak with you," rather than a formal summons, made him respond immediately. When Lyra opened her door, her appearance surprised him. She looked exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. Her normally perfect composure cracked in a manner suggesting emotional rather than just physical strain. She gestured him inside without the formal greetings Kytherian protocol typically required. Lyra stood near the viewport showing the moon they were orbiting, her back to him. When she finally spoke, her voice lacked the cold distance she'd maintained since the lab incident. "I owe you an explanation and an apology. My reaction when you accidentally touched me was disproportionate, and my behavior afterward has been unprofessional. I need you to understand why, and I need—" She hesitated. "I need someone to talk to about what happened during the emergency, and you are the only person on this ship I trust to hear this without judgment or political complication." Lyra turned from the viewport and explained with careful honesty. Kytherian sensory capabilities made physical touch far more intense than humans experienced. They perceived not just tactile sensation, but emotional resonance, unconscious thoughts, the fundamental patterns of another person's consciousness. When Alex accidentally touched her, Lyra perceived his thoughts and feelings in that moment with overwhelming clarity. And what she sensed wasn't threat or aggression, but genuine curiosity about her, warm appreciation for her expertise, and an attraction he hadn't consciously acknowledged even to himself. For a Kytherian, experiencing another person's unguarded attraction without consent felt invasive despite Alex's complete innocence of intent. Her sharp reaction was defensive response to unwanted emotional intimacy. But her avoidance afterward came from different source: shame at her own response, confusion about the intensity of connection she'd briefly experienced, and fear that addressing it honestly would make everything more complicated. During the crisis, when they worked together with lives depending on their coordination, Lyra had deliberately opened her sensory awareness to better collaborate, and what she perceived was someone utterly trustworthy. Someone whose first thought during emergency was protecting others. Someone whose essential character resonated with values she'd spent her life trying to embody. "You are the only person I feel safe being honest with," she said quietly. Alex processed carefully. "So when I accidentally touched you, you essentially experienced my unfiltered thoughts about you, including feelings I hadn't consciously recognized. And your reaction was because that felt invasive, not because you actually wanted me to stay away." Lyra's response carried vulnerability she rarely showed. "Yes, and also because what I perceived in that moment was significant. Feelings that matched ones I had been carefully not acknowledging myself. Your touch revealed a connection I was not prepared to address." She paused. "But during the emergency, I chose to open that awareness deliberately, and I perceived someone whose character under pressure reveals exactly the kind of person I would want as something more than just a colleague, if such connection were possible between our species." The conversation that followed was honest in ways neither expected. Lyra shared what the crisis brought up for her: memories of losses from earlier conflicts between their species, fears that old patterns of distrust could resurface. Alex talked about his own fear during the emergency, the realization that he cared deeply about this crew, and specifically about Lyra, whose brilliance he'd watched with growing admiration. He didn't know how to express across species barriers. They didn't resolve everything in one conversation. The complexity of potential relationship between species with such different ways of experiencing connection required careful navigation. But they established something more important: trust, mutual understanding, and acknowledgement that the sharp rejection was fear masquerading as anger. Standing together at Lyra's viewport, watching the damaged ship begin repairs, close enough now that accidental contact wouldn't trigger panic but deliberate understanding, Lyra spoke quietly. "When I told you to get your hands off me, I was reacting to unwanted intimacy forced upon me by accident. But when I called you to my quarters tonight, it was because you are the only person I trust enough to choose intimacy with, emotional rather than physical, but intimate nonetheless. That choice makes all the difference." Alex's response carried the same honesty. "I never meant to invade your boundaries, but I'm grateful that crisis gave us a chance to understand each other properly, that you trusted me enough to explain rather than just maintaining distance forever. Whatever this becomes, I'm glad we're finding out together." They remained in her quarters talking through the night.